Hey people, happy Sunday. Get a little bit of a drink here. Been looking forward to this. It's been a hot minute since we've had one of these live streams and had a discussion on one of these Sunday nights. Always enjoy them, always miss them. Been busy trying to sell the Midnight Kingdom around the country. Thank you to everybody who has already gotten their copy and for all the kindness. Cheers. It's an interesting thing to have have a book come out in this environment. It's very, very, very strange to have your research and your work out there in the world, particularly as there is a right wing reaction that has been sweeping the country, and has been met with a pretty yawning acceptance, is what I would say. It has led to some interesting conversations, but we'll talk more about that later. We are also, of course, marking the 1 year point of the criminal and genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Cheers to the people of Ukraine for fighting back against Putinism and fascism and authoritarianism. Cheers to the defeat. It's um, it's a really weird little moment, which is kind of what I predicted for 2023 in the first place. Nick and I on the Muckrake podcast were talking about like what we were to expect from this new year. And what I kept saying was that this was going to be sort of the moment in between. We're leading up to 24, which we'll talk about. There are plenty of questions about the 2024 presidential race, and you can feel that race starting to percolate. We're starting to see, of course, Nikki Haley come into the field. Ron DeSantis is sort of priming his entrance into it. Mike Pence has been paying people unbelievable amounts of money to believe in some way, shape, or form that he was going to, I don't know, be a conservative savior of sorts. On the Democratic side, Joe Biden has been hinting that he was going to run for reelection. Now you're seeing a bunch of different stories in the papers where people are starting to doubt that possibility, but that's also partly the Democratic Party trying to push towards an open primary for a successor. It's weird times. Meanwhile, we're watching, of course, Ron DeSantis in Florida running a perfect clinic on behalf of right wing billionaires on how to absolutely destroy public education. It is not only a successful operation for what he is doing and what those donors want to be done, which is the destruction of public education, as well as a system of indoctrination to hide what they have done and how we've arrived at this point, but also it is serving as an example for other right-wing legislatures and governors. Of course, we're now seeing bills that are outlawing drag shows, trying to erase the existence of trans Americans, gay Americans. Really brutal stuff that is taking shape, but is again largely being laundered and legitimized by watchdogs, supposed watchdogs in the media and also in the political class, where they should know better. They probably do know better, but they're so tired of culture wars. They're so tired of wokeness, which is pushing against established entrenched power and wealth, that they're kind of lining up to legitimize this stuff. I For the next couple of weeks, now that we're talking about this, when you're reading articles and these sort of missives, spend a lot of time looking at it through the lens of, okay, how are they treating DeSantis? How are they treating this push against gay and trans people? And it is so obvious and so disturbing. And I have to tell you, as somebody who has taught a lot of gay and trans students, as somebody who has a lot of friends who are gay and trans, and as somebody who loves a lot of people who are gay and trans, it makes me sick. It disgusts me to live in a society that is so quickly trying to roll back progress in order to help the market, in order to help the wealthy, in order to protect the wealth and power that people have. And you have to choose scapegoats in these things. You have to choose opponents. As I wrote about in the Midnight Kingdom, it's always been these vulnerable communities that get singled out and get focused on. Of course, it's happened to Jews, it's happened to women, it's happened to atheists, it's happened to gay people for forever. And you have to pick a group that very specifically you can unite a large group of people against them because they're vulnerable. They're maybe on the margins of society in terms of like what is accepted and what is not. And what is actually happening is you have to choose this enemy in order to create the narrative necessary in order to protect your own wealth and your power. That's what the right wing has always done. It's what these reactionaries have always done. It's what authoritarians have always done. So you have to go after gay and trans people. Makes me ill. It pisses me off. These poor people who are targeted and harassed and hurt and assaulted and screwed over constantly and made to live in utter fear. And the best thing that these billionaires who have been given everything, absolutely everything, and live in a time of historic inequality and historic exploitation, the only thing that they can imagine is the ability to somehow or another to expand what they already have and what they can already lord over everybody. The only thing that they can imagine is the destruction of anything that helps anybody else because they see it as an impediment for their advancement. And they're bad enough, but it's the people underneath them, the people of the middle class, the white middle class, a media class, a journalist class, a political class, those people who stand by and go ahead and launder this bullshit. Whew, it pisses me off. It really, really, truly pisses me off. Want to go ahead and dip into the questions. We have a lot of questions and a lot of good questions tonight. And I wanted to go ahead and dip into it because it stems off of this. This is from Linda. You've been talking about the return of child labor for years, and now we're seeing 12 and 13-year-olds working. What the hell is going on? I I've been following this stuff now for years. I've been analyzing the right wing, the radicalization of the Republican Party. I decided, and by the way, just to go ahead and pull back the curtains, because I mean that's what we're doing on a Sunday night. We're hanging out. Let's go ahead and talk about and talk about what I do and why I do it. When I come across something like I came across Trumpism or MAGAism in 2016, it scared the living hell out of me. I recognized in those rallies and in those rooms that something poisonous was growing, that something ugly and dangerous was metastasizing. I the first time I ever saw it was in South Carolina. I went to this Tim Scott thing with Donald Trump, and then I want to say it was December 8th, 2015. It was aboard a battleship in South Carolina, and that was the night that Trump announced his proposed Muslim ban. And I remember just watching people talk about murdering other people and imprisoning them and torturing them and taking away their rights. I remember watching that, and it chilled me so thoroughly to the core of my being. And I looked around and I realized that this was largely being played off as a lark on television. And, for ratings, and then, of course, in the newspapers, it was so obvious that my experience completely went away from the experience, or at least the way that people were portraying it. And I needed to understand what was going on. And ever since then, I have spent I've dedicated the last 7 years of my life to understanding this, because I'm the type of person that when I see something that frightens me, I have to understand it. I have to interrogate it. I can't leave it well enough alone. I have to understand it. And so for years, I have studied this right-wing authoritarian movement. I have studied the people that are represented in it, like Donald Trump again is just like a buffoon who's out in front of people, clowning around and keeping people interested in it, and appealing to people who need someone to talk to them. That's what he's done. But also paying attention to what is happening behind the Donald Trumps, behind the Ron DeSantises, who is powering this stuff. And by powering, I mean, who's coming up with the ideas? Who's coming up with the ideology? Who's coming up with the agendas? And who's paying for it, and what are they getting out of it? And what I found, and this is the reason why I was yelling about child labor years ago. I was yelling about it because it was obvious what was happening. That the right wing was creating a cleavage in this country between all of us, the people who have and the people who have not. They were creating, or intentionally creating, or intending to intentionally create a permanent over and underclass. That underclass is seen by them to be inferior. They believe that the great problem of democracy is that it has allowed inferior people to challenge the rule of the top, most powerful and most intelligent, most gifted people, which are white, wealthy men, by the way. They have pushed this forever. Like, they have pushed this idea that some people deserve to go without, right? They deserve to be poor. They deserve to suffer. And that, by the way, has, it is, it has created a situation where these group of people, their situations are worsening all the time. Of course, by the way, child labor didn't go away. Child labor went away in the United States of America for Americans for the most part. I mean, they've still had young people doing these jobs. We've brought in immigrant labor, child labor. We've depended on that. I mean, do not kid yourselves. Immigrants have been doing child labor in this country for forever. On top of that, we have relied on child labor around the world. The American global capitalist system absolutely requires that kids around the world do labor. Why? Because they need to pay them cents on the dollar, and they need to use them against any kind of solidarity movement in terms of laborers. So as a result, around the world, I mean, those people have had to work. But eventually, what happens is that this stuff always boomerangs around. Why? Because you have to have sustained growth. You have to have sustained profit. So eventually, what happens to people outside of the major nation state that benefits from all of that cheap labor around the world? Eventually, those people are going to have to suffer everything from minimum wage to regulations in the workforce. Those have to go away, and eventually, the kids are going to have to work. That's where we are now. We have arrived at the point where you are going to see, and by the way, like the red state, blue state paradigm, which I'm railing about all the time, saying it's not real because it's not. It was something that was made up with by political operatives years ago. We're gonna go ahead and I mean, we'll let red state kids work. I mean, those aren't our kids. And by the way, that mentality that those people like that they deserve what they have, you may be the most progressive person in the world, but some of the most progressive people in the world still have an idea in their head that there's some people in those states. They should get out of those states unless they agree with what's going on in the states, unless they're the wrong type of people. And if they're the wrong type of people, like screw them, right? Why should we help them? I keep seeing this on social media. Every time people talk about the secession of red states, they're like, let them go. They're taking most of our money. Are you kidding me? The abject poverty that people have to deal with in red states, the oppression that people have to deal with in red states. They're going to push child labor because of course they are. Knew it all along. Knew it for years now. Not shocked that they've got 12 and 13-year-olds cleaning up slaughterhouses, being exposed to dangerous conditions, chemicals, you name it. Not shocked. I wasn't shocked ever. And that's the direction this is gonna go. And by the way, people are gonna I mean, they already started writing columns about this. They were like, "Oh, they're trying to handle the labor shortage, so they're looking for a new place. They're looking for, with children." You imagine writing that? You imagine being fine with that being published out in the world? Madness. Yeah, that's where this thing is going, and I gotta tell you, this is not something to play around with. This Overton window that we're looking at with public education, which, by the way, the destruction of public education is a fast track into things like child labor. Like, one of the greatest achievements is public education, the idea that every kid must get an education. Well, now you get rid of that, all of a sudden, it's like you have to pay for an education, which, by the way, that's what they're going to do. I mean, once these billionaires get their claws in it, they're gonna make so much money, and they're gonna have curricula that is absolutely designed to indoctrinate people. You're gonna see people like, as this Cold War with China heats up, it's like, "Man, we gotta do something for our economy. We probably need to get those kids in the factories." I mean, the you public education, that domino goes down, you create a permanent underclass in this country. I mean, that Overton window shifts and changes. Anybody, by the way, anybody who is watching this right now, if any of you were adults during the Reagan administration and you saw America before Reagan and then you were alive during the Reagan administration, you are sitting there nodding because you know how quickly things can change in this country, how fast the culture can change. The shift over from the New Deal consensus to the neoliberal consensus went so fast it made people's heads spin. The conservative reaction in this country to wokeism and the culture war, all of these things that we've been dealing with over the past couple of years, there are reactions to it and they are gaining steam. And I got to tell you, the way that this thing is taking shape right now, and the way that the economy wants this to happen, the way that all of this stuff is moving, child labor is absolutely on the board. This is something that they're going to push for. And it's time we got serious about this. It's time we got serious about public education while we're at it. We're going to talk more about it in a little bit, but I mean, collective action at this point, is a foregone conclusion. And it's time we start wrapping our heads around that. Kathy says, "Can I just hear you go off about East Palestine for an hour?" Yeah, absolutely, we can. I'm not going to do it for an hour. I'm so pissed off about East Palestine. It is it's incredible what happened in the neoliberal consensus where basically everything that had been created, whether it was Eisenhower's infrastructure with the interstate highway system, or whether it was with what was built, of course, by the FDR administration, that investment in the infrastructure of this country when America was like growing and bustling and coming into its own for the short American century. They just stopped. They just stopped investing in it. Why would you keep investing in it? Neoliberalism says that's a terrible investment. It's fine. Just go and go and go and go. And then you look up one day and all of a sudden you're using Civil War era technology. The way that this country, for everything outside of investment and the growth of the neoliberal global system of international finance and capitalism, everything other than that, everything other than continuing to flood the coffers of law enforcement, the military industrial complex, and making sure that people are being imprisoned, and also going around the world and opening up markets and taking resources from other people, everything else has just been absolutely left to rot. What happened in East Palestine, Ohio is a tragedy. And I want to be very clear about something. because it has become the cause celebre recently. And the Republicans, and screw them, by the way. Screw them for saying that this is a racial issue, that this has happened because the Biden administration doesn't care about white people. You know who hasn't taken care of these people? It's not just the Biden administration, it's the Trump administration, and so on and so forth. What has happened here is a long train coming. It has everything to do with a lack of investment in infrastructure. It has everything to do with corporations busting unions and being able to rely on the presidency and every house of power in the country to go ahead and do whatever they want and back labor into a wall and never have to do anything besides spend their money on stock buybacks. Awful. What happened in East Palestine is a national disgrace. But guess what? It's not the only place. This happens all around the country constantly. It just so happens that East Palestine, like, was the thing that we paid attention to. I was shocked when the Biden administration was asked about this. And they said, yeah, but what about the 1,000 or so other train derailments? Are you kidding me? I've said this before on these things and in podcasts and on live streams. I am not Pete Buttigieg's biggest fan. I think he deserves to resign. I think that this should be a big deal. I think we should talk about our aging and cracking and crumbling infrastructure. And yes, we just had some bills to invest in these things. Why have we not done it for decades? Because we don't care. The people who are in charge don't care about this stuff. They want to rack up their profits and they want to keep the federal government there, not for oversight, not for regulation, not for anything that makes anybody safe. They're there to clean up the messes when they create them. When Norfolk Southern's trains derail and destroy a town, and God knows what's going to happen from this in terms of cancers and deaths and suffering, they know that the government will be there to clean it up for them. Why do they care? It is completely rational within this system to not take care of people, to not make sure that things are safe and operative. Why? The government is there. It's a piggy bank. It's the exact same thing with our economy. When these greedy corporations and individuals melt down an economy, the government's there to take our money and bail them out. It can't be clearer how this thing works. Who gets screwed? You get screwed. I get screwed. Our neighbors get screwed. Our environment gets screwed. It disgusts me. It's absolutely disgusting. And to go along with this, Earl says on East Palestine, if only we had a left to expose what the Republicans, Democrats, and corporations in the role of lobbying, deregulation, stock buybacks, and causing environmental disasters and use as an organizing tool. I got to tell you, that's the damnedest thing. This happens, a major ecological meltdown in the middle of the country in Ohio. And what happens? It immediately becomes a culture war. That's it. There's no discussion about how to prevent these things in the future. There's no discussion about what we need to do. Because if we had a government that actually responded to these things, I don't know, we'd already be talking about it. This would be a major issue. We would take care of it for the exact same reason that, I don't know, school shootings, mass shootings with AR-15s, you name it. Those things would be on the tips of every tongue, but they're not, because everything becomes a culture war, which has nothing to do with actually getting anything done except for subversive agendas such as like what's happening in Ron DeSantis's Florida. I hate it. I hate Erica says Palestine. I'll grant that. I overcorrect into Palestine because I'm from Indiana. We have a history of mispronouncing everything. For instance, there's a Cairo, Illinois. We all know that Cairo is what it is, but it is Palestine. That's what they say. I overcorrected. I'll sit with it. But yeah, it's disgusting. And the fact that this got turned into a culture war thing, it doesn't cease to piss me off. There constantly, it's one meltdown after another that shows we are on the precipice of so many larger meltdowns. Economic, political, democratic, societal, you name it, and it's just don't care, don't care. It is infuriating. It is infuriating that this keeps happening. That we live in the richest, most powerful nation in the history of the world. We can't keep people from freezing to death in the winter. We can't keep people from sleeping out on the streets. The only conversation we have is where should we move people so people don't have to look at them and feel bad about them. It's awful, absolutely awful. The East Palestine thing, it pisses me off to no end. Awful. Pal asks, "What's been your biggest surprise since The Midnight Kingdom came out?" I saw you said something about backlash from the Christian fascist. Yeah, the Christian nationalists have not been happy with The Midnight Kingdom. They've been pretty displeased. Um, I think I'm the closest thing to an apostate as there is. I came from those groups when I was younger. I have a lot of experience in those groups. I think they see me as something of a traitor, and obviously, I'm a member of a lot of conspiracy theories or a character in a lot of these conspiracy theories. I got an email a couple of days ago that I'm obviously a CIA plant who's pretending to be a working class writer, which is wild, by the way, because my book is incredibly critical of the CIA, but don't be surprised that they didn't read the book or absorb it, which is actually interesting because the book is actually just a critique of how Christian mythologies have been used, by the wealthy and the powerful against people. It's not even against the religion itself. People can be religious all they want, just don't shove it down people's throats and hurt people. Um, I think my biggest surprise, I've had so again, 2023 is a weird year. And I have had a weird response in some circles. A couple of bookstores have apparently said that they would love to have me come in and talk and do an event, but they're afraid it's too political, which is wild because for years now, obviously, and even some places where I've done some of these events, like they've loved the political, they've loved having people come in and having these conversations. I think in a way, what has been surprising to me, and it's been part of a barometer in a lot of different arenas, it is becoming very, very obvious to me that in the Joe Biden era, since we've moved past the Trump administration, that a lot of people simply don't want to think about this stuff anymore. They don't want to actually like sit with what's going on and understand the problem. Um, I said, when Biden won 2020, I said, this thing that he keeps saying where it's like it's time to return to normal, like that wasn't going to happen. And that message, which I understand was like a campaign message, that message has been so detrimental. And so I keep looking around and it feels so much and the book is one instance of this. I mean, it's been strange because I was, like, shadow banned on Twitter once Elon Musk took over, which was wild. Thanks to supportive people, I've been able to still get word about stuff out, but it's been strange. It's been really, really strange. And, like, coming into these, like, circles and realizations, it has just it's been mind-blowing. It really truly has, and, the book, I'm very proud of it, the things people have said have been incredibly kind and supportive, and I've heard from people it's making a difference with them and their families and stuff, and their communities, like, I keep hearing from groups, that are reading it together and using it in terms of, like, trying to push collective action and do things, which is awesome. Um, I've heard from some people in some other countries that it's meant something to them. That is awesome. But it's also very strange in this current moment where the reaction to what's going on in the world is shifting. And it's because Donald Trump, of course, is not out there as the headline stealing, walking, talking existential crisis. Instead, it's somebody like Ron DeSantis, who I'm going to address in this next question, who seems well, I mean, he's competent, but he seems to certain circles of people that he is less offensive version of Trump. And so it's a weird environment. The weather out there is strange, is what I would say. So I keep trying to sort of wrap my head around what's going on, and it looks more and more to me like these moments where, Reagan Democrats, or before that, the middle class, middle white class that welcomed everything from segregation to the fascist takeover of their countries. The weather is strange, really, really odd. And so there's like little moments with everything from, again, being like shadow banned on Twitter, having people target me because of the book, particularly because I'm speaking out against white supremacy and capitalism, and also religious mythologies being used for fascists, but also seeing the reaction in terms of, "Oh, things are too political right now," or "We'd rather not get into politics," from people who absolutely, for 4 years of Donald Trump, engaged in constant politics. And I think a lot of people, again, are tired, and I get being tired, but, like, things are things are tough right now. Like, we really are at a crossroads. So, that's been the weird thing. I mean, the reaction to it has been wonderful. I'll just say that. Joanne, can we defeat DeSantis? And if so, how? It feels like we're losing too many battles. Cheers. I agree. I'll tell you what's giving me hope. Those students down there, man, you have so many vulnerable students in the state of Florida. There are teachers who have been cowed into a corner with book bans, with directed harassment from the power of the state, just a power mad governor who's just able to do whatever he wants. Billions of dollars being spent to destroy public education. And you have students walking out of class, students speaking up, students protesting. And I'll tell you what, man, those students, they're laying everything on the line. I don't know if you all remember this, but following the Black Lives Matter protest movement, all of these states were all talking about possibly withholding everything from educational funding to state jobs. There's a lot of state jobs from anybody who gets caught protesting or being on the wrong side of the ideological line. And these students in Florida are walking out of their schools. And why? It's not because they're all gay or they're all trans or they're all African American people who feel like their existences are being raised. Some of them are. A lot of them are doing it because they have friends. They're doing it out of a selfless need to stand up for other people. We can learn from them. That selflessness, that putting themselves on the line, that's what needs to happen. And I got news. Here's the thing, and I wrote about this on my Substack this week, but I want to go ahead and reiterate it here. I come from the academy. I'm a former professor. I reached the level of full professor before I ended up leaving. And I got to tell you, professors, academics, tenured, untenured, adjunct, you name it. The time for action is now. The time to come together in a solidarity movement, to walk off the job, to go on strike, to hold these protests. It is now, now, now. The Ron DeSantis thing is picking up speed because a lot of it is being laundered by our media that is moving the Overton window, but also because it's just happening. There's no political resistance, within that legislature. There's some people who stand up and say it's wrong, but everything is just sort of rubber stamp for DeSantis, and it moves. It's handed down from the wealthy, down to their institutes and think tanks, down to DeSantis, down to the legislature, and then done. This needs to become a major issue now. 2023, as I keep saying, is when we have to get this stuff together. We have to be prepared for 2024 in 2023. And 2023, in terms of organizing, is going to make the difference for decades. Decades, not years, decades to come. It's time to walk out. It's time to say, hell no, we're not going to take this anymore. We're not going to put up with the targeting. We're not going to put up with censorship. We're not going to put up with the book bans. We're not going to put up with these attacks. We're not going to put up with the austerity anymore. We're done. Grind the damn thing to a halt and make it a national issue. This DeSantis thing needs to be put to bed now, not next year when he runs for president. It needs to stop now. This guy is so incredibly dangerous. And what he has unleashed in Florida, even if Ron DeSantis in some way, shape, or form doesn't become the Republican nominee, even if he doesn't become the standard bearer of the Republican Party, what he represents and what he is showing people is possible using the power of the state, it has to stop. Liz, by the way, said, "What are my thoughts on the potential outcome of the Dominion lawsuit?" I hope Fox News is walking around in suspenders and a barrel. Just absolutely wiped out. I don't know if it's going to happen, but keep it coming. I Fox News deserves it. As I was saying on the podcast this week, it is not a news organization. And by the way, like the Dominion lawsuit is one thing, but people have to start making moves on them in terms of regulation. We have to re-regulate our media. We have to. We have no choice. Mark says, please dive into the Kissinger Chat GPT article, which was a Wall Street Journal op-ed, if you want to call it that. I feel like the repercussions of that one are going to be massive. Absolutely, they are. I in particular, I've been worried for years about the tech true believers. I have watched them create their own religion and movement for years. I've been reading about this stuff for so long, and now watching this come to fruition with AI is really frightening. Because if you pay attention, um, to what is happening with this. It is a perpetuation of power and ideology, particularly white supremacist, patriarchal, classist, overtly exploitative ideas. So here's the thing: people, um, people look at AI and they're like, "Oh, what's it thinking? What it's doing?" It runs along the lines of what it is taught by the people who program it and the people who set the parameters. Like every other piece of technology throughout human history, that technology works along the lines of what the wealthy and the powerful want it to do. This goes even during the industrial age. It was the wealthy and the powerful having the means of production. You all of a sudden you start printing books and you start printing newspapers. Guess what? It's just what the wealthy and the powerful want you to read. That's how this stuff works. To see Kissinger, who is one of the most dangerous human beings in modern history, one of the most consequentially dangerous, evil people, to sit there and be like, man, this has some real potential. That should tell you everything you need to know, because rational thought for decades now. I mean, go back even just to the Cold War. Look how the rationalists looked at this. It was all about overthrowing countries and leaders and thinking that we could survive a nuclear war, we could win a nuclear war. That's the type of person who is programming AI. And when we start giving more and more power to things that are beyond our democratic control, that's the entire idea behind a technocracy, behind the so-called deep state. What is happening and what has happened since the early 20th century is that in response to democracy developing, the administration of power has pushed and pushed and pushed towards non-democratic places of power. People that you and I have never heard of who make decisions that oftentimes we don't understand and we've never heard the outcome of. If we go ahead and move closer and closer to AI making decisions, both about policy, but also statecraft and also strategy, holy shit, that is just a furthering of anti democratic ideas and principles being pushed forward and away from us. Our economy is already basically run by everything from algorithms to artificial intelligence. That's one of the great secrets in all of this. This is one of the reasons why there's so much angst and anxiety. People are saying, oh, these conspiracies are happening, or they're hurting children and they're doing this. We're afraid of the fact that power has been taken away from us and walled off from us. We feel so much economic anxiety because the economy is wired specifically to help a certain group of people. AI is just furthering that idea. And watching Henry Kissinger, disgusting Henry Kissinger, sit around and tout the benefits of this stuff, also in an article with Schmidt. Oh my God. It's just continuing the cycle over and over and over again. By the way, if you haven't bought The Midnight Kingdom, A History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis, that's what I'm talking about. It is just a continual cycle of the powerful finding one way after another to continue and to expand their power. Logan says, do you see any lasting effects of the recent labor movements we've seen, or are they more of a flash in the pan? Oh man, strikes last year were up so high. We're seeing young people in particular just push against this system, which is one of the reasons why we have to do everything from talk about child labor to attacking wokeism in our colleges and all of that. No, what it's actually about is it's trying to go ahead and control the next generation because the next generation doesn't want to work for cents on the dollar. They don't want to be exploited. They don't want to hand over their bodies. They don't want to be in these jobs where they're disrespected. I have to tell you, the labor movement is gaining steam. The problem is that you hardly ever hear about it. Occasionally, you'll hear about it in an article. Nick and I on the podcast try and highlight it as much as we possibly can. When I'm writing about stuff, when I'm writing articles, I try and talk about it as much as I can, but it's happening. There is a developing labor movement, and the question is, where will it take off? And this comes to the question that gets asked later, like, what does that look like? And the question is, will there be a flash point? Will there be something that happens that goes ahead and sets this thing off? But no, I don't think it's a flash in the pan. I think it's gaining steam. I think the labor movement is starting to figure itself out. It's looking for leaders, it's looking for connective tissues, and we're waiting on a flashpoint. And I think we're going to see that probably in the next couple of years. Mitch says, what do you think about this Roald Dahl and James Bond censoring stuff? I could talk about this for a while. So let me go ahead. I'm going to tell you how this story came out, and then I'm going to explain what had happened. Roald Dahl's work, the writer of everything from Willy Wonka to Matilda, a new edition of Roald Dahl's work was released this year. People looked at the edition that had come out in 2001 and the edition that came out in 2023. They noticed that things had been changed. They noticed that just a couple of little passages had been changed, and they had been changed to take out anything that might be deemed offensive or something that might be culturally inappropriate. There's also word now that James Bond books are being scrubbed of like racist, sexist ideas. So here's the thing. Immediately when this happens, and here's the whole point of a culture war. That happens. And suddenly what happens is that the right wing Republicans are like, "Oh my God, can you believe this George Orwell shit? Can you believe they're going in and they're changing this because they want to go ahead?" It's about political correctness. It's about making sure that the ideology of wokeness continues to be transmitted. And that's the biggest story in the world. And why is it the biggest story? Because on its face, that feels like what actually happened. That's not what happened. Because I have to tell you something. I want that stuff to remain in those old books. I want Roald Dahl's stuff to have the offensive elements. I want the James Bond stuff to have the offensive elements. Because here's the thing. If you actually want change, if you actually want progress, if you actually want reform, the first thing that you have to do is prove that it's there. The first thing that you want to do is admit that there is a problem that has to be dealt with. That's not what's happening here. And by the way, this will happen with movies, television shows, these streaming services, all of it. This will happen, and it's not because of ideology. It's not because the people who printed this book, or the people who are printing the James Bond books, or the people who are going to edit television shows or movies. It's not because they're pushing an agenda. It is because they don't want their products to be boycotted. They don't want to take the chance that some people might notice that there are offensive things in this, and so they might boycott it. It might become a piece of the culture war. And they know that by going ahead and censoring it and changing it, they can ignite a culture war in which the right says, oh my God, can you believe this shit? And the liberals say, oh yeah, this is great. I want to buy it. It is corporate self-consideration. And that's what it always is, over and over and over again. What has actually happened, and this goes back to neoliberalism, is that it has gone ahead and it has created faux populism. And that faux populism is a place in which all of these corporate entities, they have to pretend to have an ideology, they have to pretend to have values and principles, and that helps them. And what has happened in this country is we now have two parallel economies. We now have a woke economy where people are going to watch movies and buy certain clothes and frequent certain restaurants and buy certain brands. And now you have a created right wing MAGA economy in which people go ahead and buy the other things, their rivals and such. So what happens is that the market continually looks for new shifting demographics and new shifting competing markets. That's it. You can go back and forth between them all day long. This isn't mind or groupthink. This isn't political correctness. It's about corporations doing what corporations do. It has absolutely nothing to do with wokeness running amok. It's corporations taking care of themselves. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Melinda says, I hope this isn't too weird or personal. It's a hell of a start. But I really enjoyed your event the other night with Sarah Kinzier. Please, more of these. Thank you. And it got me wondering about people like y'all. What's it like to get together with other people who follow and study this stuff? First of all, last week I was very, very lucky and fortunate to do an event with Sarah Kinzier at Left Bank Books in St. Louis. Hell of a bookstore, by the way. It was really good of them to host that, and I really enjoyed the conversation. First of all, I like Sarah quite a bit as a person. I've appreciated her for a while, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it was really cool. If you haven't seen that event, go watch it. It's really an interesting thing, and we talked about it. It's like sometimes when you do an event for a book, like I'm doing for the Midnight Kingdom, like you have to sort of get people up to speed. You hope they'll come with you, and Sarah and I are on the same page and have been for years. And so we just hit the ground running. And there were times, and if you watch this video, there are times where we end up like deep, deep in the weeds. And we kind of, we have to have a moment where it's like, oh, we probably have to pull this back to make sure we're not like, leaving everybody. That was awesome. I had such a good time. And thank you for people who watched and asked questions. That was awesome. Sarah as a person has my utter admiration, and I like her so much as a human being for multiple reasons. We both grew up in so-called flyover America. We've both been piecing together these things when, we're part of a class that isn't supposed to be writing about these things, talking about these things. Sarah has been very successful, but Sarah has also eschewed a certain amount of success and wealth because she is, questioning power, and it doesn't pay in this country to question power. And, you know, it's a lonely, lonely job. And I'll be honest, one of the reasons I love doing, these bourbon talks, one of the reasons I like doing, like, live shows, and I like to go out and do, like, book events and stuff like that, is it feels so good to talk and be around people like you all. Um, this is a lonely business. For years, people like Sarah and I have been criticized as being alarmist, as being hysterical, even as we're just following, what we're given. I mean, uh, this has all been very obvious for anyone paying attention. It just so happens that there is a financial incentive not to follow it, to go ahead and pretend like everything's okay and everything is totally fine. It'll work out in the end. You can either go ahead and just ignore all of it and write stories and do podcasts to make people feel better about what all's going on, or you can say, hey, it is pretty bad, but I promise you it's going to work out in the end because this attorney general is going to take care of everything, or the institutions will figure it out. There's a plan, I promise. When we get together, it's hanging out like normal human beings, but it's also just sort of an acknowledgement of, okay, we understand what's going on. It feels good to know that. It feels good to understand one another. The exact same way it feels whenever I talk to other experts. I was talking to I don't wanna mention their name. I don't know if they'd wanna have me talking about it. But, I was talking with this expert the other day, and it's just sort of this thing where, like, you get in a conversation, it's like, "Thank you for talking about this." "Thank you for, understanding what's going on and actually, like, sort of, fighting the fight, because it's so much easier not to. There are a hell of a lot less death threats, a hell of a lot less harassment and stalking, and by the way, again, it's an incredible financial and professional incentive to not talk about this stuff. So yeah, when you get together with other people in this job, and there's only a few of us, like this is a really, really small world of people like us who are like on this corner saying, hey, this thing is going on and we need to talk about this thing. There are not that many of us. It is a small group, and I think we really appreciate each other, and I think we bolster one another, which is wonderful. But as I said, this is one of the reasons I like to do these live streams. It's one of the reasons why I like to do live shows and stuff, because there are a lot of us, but this is a very lonely thing. I said it in the event with Sarah. I was like, the people who watch these bourbon talks are the people who listen to my podcast or read my books and her books as well and her podcast. Like, this is a small group of people who have a lot of understanding of history and politics and other facets. And they're also okay with looking the threat in the face. That is a very small self-selecting group of people. So yeah, that was a lot of that. We're going up on an hour, and then we'll finish what's in the glass, and then we'll finish the questions after that. Temporary Solution says, "Is the Biden-led attack on telemedicine, which reinforces the DEA-inflicted Adderall shortage, which mirrors the CDC opioid RX genocide, going to be dangerous to the nation when the Christo-fascist Republicans use it to attack women and reproductive health care?" Yeah, absolutely. I gotta tell you, I think the push recently on telemedicine and, what's been happening to people with, Adderall has sucked. Absolutely sucked. I know I know people who are having to, like, hoard their medicine because they're afraid that they're not going to be able to use it, and that's horrific. Absolutely horrific. In this day and age, I mean, my god, it's awful, and now we're pushing away from this telehealth that, sustained this country during the pandemic, and we're gonna make it harder on people to go out and get their medicine, and we're gonna go ahead and second guess them. The way that we treat medication, the way that we treat drugs, the way that we treat mental health in this country, investment in all of it, it's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. And The Adderall thing, it just boggles the mind. It really truly does. And, if these people had any courage, I don't know if it's, you wanna talk about Biden, you wanna talk about Democrats, I mean, Republicans, like, they're gonna do what they're gonna do, they're gonna shill for these people, but, like, to sit there and keep people from the medicine that they need and not take on big pharma, which has I mean, God knows how many people have died because of big pharma, who knows how many people have suffered because of big pharma. Like, these monopolies that have been allowed to rise up. And it's not just, by the way, and whenever we talk about monopolies, the first thing you think about are profits, right? Like, oh, they're able to charge whatever they want. Absolutely. That's a problem. But like the way that they destroy customer service, the way that they take advantage of people. I mean, the things that happen in the wake of the creation of a monopoly are almost too horrific to bring to mind. And you think about everybody, like people who are relying on Adderall to people who are relying on insulin. It's so awful, and there's no excuse for this. Only that we allowed these people to gain a measure of power and wealth so that they could lobby in perpetuity against anybody regulating them. That goes for the railroads too, by the way. Great work, everyone. They lobby into perpetuity in order to increase their power and their wealth and just to continue it over and over and over into perpetuity, and then as a result, you can't get forward. And you're exactly right, they block innovation. They keep they keep things from moving forward too. It really, really, really staggers the mind. Ray asked, "Do you still think the debt ceiling mess will lead to Social Security cuts?" I don't know. I don't know if it will, necessarily in this case lead to, Social Security cuts, but I mean, man, we're talking about it, aren't we? We're talking about Social Security and Medicare being hurt. Um, I don't know if the debt ceiling is what's going to be what pushes the Social Security debate over the edge, but I will say that if the Republicans push it far enough, I think the Biden administration and the Democrats will go along with it. And I think in part, the reason why it will either happen there or it will happen in the near future, particularly the idea that retirement age will go up to 70, is because we're already seeing that that's what the market wants. I mean, all you gotta do is look over at France and see that they've already pushed this thing. And by the way, they will go ahead and, they'll overturn a car and set fire to an entire block, over stuff like this. But the market wants retirement to go up. They want the age to increase. So I don't know if Social Security, I don't know if it'll be raised by the debt ceiling. I don't know if that will come later. Um, I'm not sure, but I gotta tell you, one thing that you never lose money doing is betting on the market to get what the market wants. And that's the fear in all of this, is that as America declines and as the spoils, like I was talking about, of the post-World War II, economic arena, as those spoils start to wash away, like the spoils and the perks, they have to go away with it, you know? You could just tax the wealthy. You could reinstitute taxes and be fine there, but, yeah, like, that's almost, too logical, right? Well, you would wanna tax those people. And what's incredible with that is the way the capitalism works is you could go ahead and tax them, and it sort of goes ahead and rolls things back and restarts the race, and then it's all about expanding the wealth and profit moving forward. It wouldn't actually hurt anything. Like, they'd probably stamp around and complain and moan about it, but it'd be fine. It'd be absolutely fine to go ahead and tax them and to go ahead and reinstitute these things. We're coming up on 60 minutes. This is nice. Enjoy doing these things. As I said, it's nice to be around a bunch of people who get it and understand it and are willing to look the problem in the face. I think that's essential to fixing things, right? Because being in denial and denying that it's there, it literally it just boots the problem down the road where it grows and becomes larger and larger. Um, As I say always, I think we're going to defeat this thing. And one of the questions here asks for more specifics on that. And I'll get into it, but I think it's going to work out. But as long as we're in denial, it just isn't. There's no way. You have to have a moment of clarity. All right. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 to better days. All right, we got questions about 2024. Because what are we doing besides sitting in a holding pattern until 2024? Am I right? All right. Janelle says, if there was a matchup between Trump and Biden again, or DeSantis and Biden, who do you think would become president? Um, Trump and Biden. I think Biden wins that. I think I think Biden goes ahead and defeats Trump in a rematch. I think you still see sort of an alarm that takes place over what's going on in the country. Um, Biden, DeSantis, it really depends on what's going on in the country, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a future question. If I had to say right now, unfortunately, with the way things are working and the way things are playing out, I think I think that's DeSantis. I do. Ed says, "How do we get law enforced against the law enforced against the January 6th leadership?" I don't think that you can wait on Congress to do that, or the January 6th commission. They've already told you it's just Donald Trump. I mean, the entire problem is Donald Trump, and once we move past him, it'll be totally fine. I joke, but it takes nothing more than a grassroots movement to actually start talking about this and dealing with corruption and dark money in government. Graves says, okay, give me 2024 in a nutshell. I don't know how to do that. The problem is that we don't know what the conditions will be going around that. Will the war in Ukraine, will it spread? Will the Cold War with China be more of a lukewarm war, a hot war at that point? How's the economy doing? I don't know. Undoubtedly, we know this. Every year has more and more shocking stuff that we didn't see coming. Um, Natural disasters, saber rattling. The question is, do we go into 2024 talking about an actual agenda to make things better, or are we continuing to have culture war battles? And if we're having culture war battles, and if DeSantis figures out a way to take white anger, Christian nationalism, and American militarism, and all of this patriarchal bullshit, you find all that together, I mean, that's a really frightening thing, and if conditions on the ground are bad, that's tough. That's really, really tough. Been Seeing Things says, when the next crisis occurs in 2024, where will we turn for real-time information if this space continues to be effectively compromised? That was asked on Twitter. One of the things that we haven't really wrapped our heads around is that by creating historic inequality, and by creating monopolistic communication platforms such as Twitter and Facebook, we have found a way to take reality and put it up for sale by the wealthiest few. None of them, by the way, are in favor of democracy. None of them are in favor of actual reform or redistribution or actually addressing any of the problems. The problem isn't just that Elon Musk overtook Twitter. It's that constantly what we are being fed by these people who control information is a lens of the world that hides what is actually happening. Again, everyone, the Midnight Kingdom, a history of power, paranoia, and the coming crisis. I think over the next few years, if things don't break the right way, if we don't fight the right fight, if we don't create a new progressive leftist movement in this country, particularly a populist democratic movement, small d. If we're not able to do that, I'm going to talk about like what that would actually look like in this next question, or the next couple of questions, I should say. If we're not able to do that, reality is going to change so quickly because perception changes with all these platforms being controlled by these people. Twitter has already moved towards the right. Facebook has always been with the right. That was their demographic chosen in terms of like who they were serving and what they were profiting from. It's the type of thing where if you live in, I don't know, India, China, one of these places where these tech companies have so happily censored things for these despots, you look around and you realize like a lot of these people have no idea what's actually going on. They don't have access to other information. They don't have access to actual truth. It's all sort of filtered through this propaganda lens that again, the big tech companies that we're talking about here have control over and happily go ahead and turn the knobs and censor the things for these people. The frightening thing, and by the way, Patricia here brought up Germany 1938. One of the reasons that the Nazi regime was so successful was because they had control over radio. Mass media in the form of radio was such a huge thing for the Nazi regime, and authoritarians have to take over control of the way that information is disseminated. It just so happens that social media can do that job, but much quieter in a way that you don't have to pay much attention to it. It just sort of floats through a little bit. It's already been that way with television. I mean, cable news networks, all of that, they've given people a completely altered lens of reality. And now social media offers another altered lens of reality. And if we allow these things to continue to be controlled by these people, oh my God, the consequences are almost unimaginable. Pop Tart says, I know you're routinely asked about what you see in the next 2 to 5 to 10 years, etc. I know you've mentioned challenges and tough battles, would love some more specifics if you have them. Not to focus too much on odds, but what specific outcomes do you see as most likely? So I want to be honest with you. I talk a lot on these things about having hope. I don't want to sit here and tell you that the most likely outcome is the best outcome. And I don't want to do that because I don't want to lie to you. There is so much stacked against us. Everything from what I was just talking about, monopolistic elite control over communication, the corruption of government, the growing authoritarian movement, the absolute um, corruption of all of our institutions. Oh, and growing technology. That's not good. The odds are not in our favor. I'll be straight up honest with you. And by the way, that would sort of not be great in the first place. Like if I was to sit here and tell you that the odds are in our favor and you know, if you're just gonna flip coins, like most times things are gonna work out the right way, in the democratic way, the humane way, the more equal way. That's not true. Right now, the odds are completely stacked against us, but I have to tell you that if you start working towards this, if you start organizing towards this, if you work on yourself and you work on your communities and you work on your relationships, if you start actually working towards this, the odds shift. What we find in politics is that things always seem impossible until they seem inevitable. And part of the issue is the groupthink. It's the way that all of this is portrayed to us that nothing could possibly ever change. So why would you try and change it? Just sit at home, watch what you watch, do what you do, consume the way you consume. Just let the experts take care of it. Yeah, it's not great, but it'll be fine. At least it's not you who's sending their kid to work at a factory all day or in a mine all day. But I have to tell you, that can change in a hurry. And so right now, the odds are not in our favor. The odds are stacked against us. And that worries me considerably. Every passing day that there isn't something that looks like the Black Lives Matter protest movement taking place in every major American city and picking up momentum and challenging the official narratives of, you know, corporate media and these politicians, that worries me. We're in 2023. It's time to get moving. We're almost at the end of February. I think as it heats up, we're going to see more of the labor movement. We're going to see more pushback on some things, more of these flashpoints. But again, the odds are not in our favor right now. The odds are right now that there will probably be an authoritarian movement that gets rid of a lot of the progress of the 20th century. It spares a lot of the white middle class, the professional managerial class. Maybe they push back on certain things. Maybe we avoid some of the more explicit brutality and murder. Meanwhile, the brutality and exploitation of global capitalism continues. Someone like a Vladimir Putin turns into an accepted figure again. He's welcomed back into the G conference. And they continue to push like all of this stuff, and it just continues to grow and grow and grow until the overt cruelty just spills out. Now, that being said, AMK says, I love your work, JY Sexton, which, by the way, very kind. Thank you. I can easily imagine worst case scenarios. Will you describe for us your vision of a best case scenario should we collectively rise to the challenges before us? What are tangible actions taken and potential results in, say, the next 5 to 20 years? I'll say this. I am noticing more and more people starting to talk about wanting to disabuse themselves of the traumas of capitalism and our modern society, starting to work on themselves, starting to reach out to others, engage in this solidarity. I will say this, and this is another thing that gives me hope. The wealthy have so much control and so much leverage. Austerity has been pushed so hard. Exploitation has been so fine-tuned that in almost every industry in the country, people are struggling. I mean, that goes all the way up to tech, where you're seeing the people who a couple of years ago were masters of the world, like this, the rocket ship's never coming down. That exploitation is so vice-like, and it's growing worse and worse with every single day. And that seems bad because, of course, that feels like the power is all on one side. Human beings reach a point of being exploited and things being so bad and being lied to so much and being just brutalized so much that people push back. They reach a point where they say, there's some shit I will not eat. I think something that we need to see is mass action, kids walking out of classrooms. And by the way, I got to tell you, things are primed right now for a generational battle. The boomer generation has held on to power for so long that things are absolutely primed for a really, really big generational battle, where it feels like the odds are stacked so far against a younger generation that they sort of rebel, and you have a 60s or a 70s type situation, which, by the way, could happen in response to, I don't know, the growing Cold War, in which all of these sort of things, start pressing on things. I think if you had these flashpoints start to build up, particularly in the age of social media, before we build our own great firewall, if we can have some sort of a flashpoint that takes place with a labor action, in which the side of the wealthy and the powerful is so overtly cruel and so overtly in the wrong, I think that things could begin to tip in a different direction. I think the Black Lives Matters movement made it very obvious that things can happen in a hurry like that. It can happen with law enforcement. It can happen with democracy and voting rights. It can happen with gay and trans people being targeted, African Americans being targeted, women having their rights taken away. These things can happen very, very quickly. But the question is, will there be a flashpoint? And will there be a battle that starts to put this in focus? And will it start to move the needle? Or are we going to continue having this culture war in which there's some people who are being brutalized, some people who are being hurt, there are political assassinations, there's harassment, there's fascists marching in the street. Are we going to continue having that happen where our media and political class will continue to say, oh, it's not that bad, and people just need to, sit down and shut up? But I think that is going to tilt, and that is going to change. Riley asked approximately 300,000 civilians were killed in the illegal invasion of Iraq, where Biden voted yes, which we need to remember that, by the way. How can our country heal when we continue history of indigenous genocide, slavery, covert military ops to wreak havoc in the world? Well, first things first, God knows how many innocent people were killed in the war on terror. It is awful to absolutely think about. And I want to point out that the people who vouched for that war, the people who voted for that war, the people who pushed that war, they've been so laundered. Everybody from Biden to Clinton to Kerry, even George W. Bush and Dick Cheney have been laundered of the blood that is theirs to carry around from that war. And this question from Riley is very important because the answer is that we cannot move forward unless we actually deal with the past. That's why we have to continue talking about what's going on. We have to stare in the face of where we're coming from in order to figure out a future that is better. And again, that's one of the reasons why I've been so frustrated is something like the Midnight Kingdom comes out and people think it's too political. We have to talk about it. We have to deal with it. That's the simple truth of the matter. Kate asks, last question. I've really enjoyed the focus lately on psychotherapy and trauma. How are you feeling about your experience in all of this? I remain completely and utterly convinced that trauma, first of all, is a lens that we have to understand in order to understand the world. I think it is like one of the most transformative and important discoveries or areas of study that we've come across in a very long time. The conversations I'm having with experts, the materials I'm coming across, the results that I'm seeing from actually carrying these things out speak to the point that trauma that we endure as people completely and utterly change us and gives us insight into how we can be better and how we can have a better society. I am also seeing a lot of people who are starting to look into therapy, which I think is absolutely essential. Capitalism and neoliberalism have done an absolute number on us. And, it's everything from people who have scarcity and precarity. They're constantly terrified in a state of panic that, they're going to fall apart. Their lives are going to fall apart. They don't have anything. Oftentimes, therapy is not available to them because thanks, Ronald Reagan and austerity and neoliberalism, the middle class oftentimes feels neurotic because they're not able to ascend to the wealthiest class, and they feel guilty because they're taking advantage of the middle class, or I mean, the working class, as well as people of color and people around the world. That's its own problem. And the wealth class is the wealth class. Um, Therapy is absolutely important, as is just a lived, measured life. You don't have to go to therapy in order to understand these things. It's taking stock of yourself, who you are, what your values are, and are you behaving according to them? Are you having actual legitimate conversations with people? Are you engaging in legitimacy or intimacy? In your workplace, are you engaging in solidarity? In your community, are you engaging in solidarity? Like, are you being honest with people? Are you being an honest broker? Are you being honest with yourself? These are the things that have to happen in order to disabuse ourselves of what capitalism and neoliberalism have heaped upon us. And now authoritarianism and fascism, and I keep saying this, they make us feel alone and they make us feel terrified. And if we're going to defeat them, we have to remember that we're not alone and that we're not powerless to make things better. And it is a cycle of trauma that has to be stopped. Everything that we're talking about here, from living in an Ohio town and suddenly having a train derail and bring God knows what kind of chemicals and sicknesses to your town, to having authoritarians basically erase your existence, or to go after you because you're a teacher or a health professional or you name it. We're talking about constant inflicted trauma. People who can't afford food, people who are getting thrown out of their houses, people who are living paycheck to paycheck, people who don't understand why they're doing the things that they're doing, why they're engaging in exploitation and cruelty. We have to learn these things and we have to build bridges between all of us. People asked about the best case scenario, and I'll tell you this. The best case scenario involves us building bridges with working people in the middle of the country that we never thought that we would be able to talk to. And why? Because they are victims of this exact same system. When we start to realize that white supremacy, capitalistic exploitation, and neoliberalism make us all victims, and we can begin to realize that intersectionality is real and that we can come together and actually push back and find a measure of deliverance, that's the answer. That is the best case scenario. And it involves looking trauma and oppression and cruelty in the face. That's what I truly and honestly believe. On that note, thank you for hanging out with me for a Sunday night. I always enjoy these things. I will be back here soon. I appreciate you all so much. I want to propose a toast. Cheers again to a better future. I believe we can make it happen. We can make the odds better. We can move in a better direction. Cheers. All right, everybody. I'll be back this week. We have a new episode of the Muckrake Podcast on Tuesday, the Weekender on Friday. If you're not subscribed to my Substack, Dispatches from a Collapsing State, and pick up the Midnight Kingdom, History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis. Apparently too political for certain bookstores and groups of people. I don't know what to say to that. Really don't. I appreciate all of you. Like I said, this is a lonely job. You make it better. Stay safe out there. Talk soon.